Wonderful. Shall we begin?
Yes, let's do it.
Perfect. So, hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for joining us tonight for this program and an evening with author K.E. Semmel. My name is Maximus Charney, and I'm the program's coordinator for the Southern California chapter here at the Tourette Association of America, and I'll be one of your moderators for this program. Assisting me with the Q&A duration at the ending of tonight's program is my colleague Portia Ruiz, who is the Director of Development for Southern California. Participants will also have the ability to engage in that Q&A discussion as with our speaker at the end, so please feel free to place out those questions in the Q&A box throughout the discussion or utilize that chat feature. At the session, we'll be asking attendees to partake in a brief survey to let us know what your thoughts are of tonight's program. Not only is your feedback super important to us, but it also helps us to demonstrate the importance of continuing these adult-focused programs like tonight. With that being said, I'd like to introduce our wonderful speaker for tonight's discussion. K.E. Semmel has translated more than a dozen books from Danish. His essays have been published in HuffPost, LitHub, The Millions, Electric Literature, Washington Post, The Writer's Chronicles, and furthermore. The Book of Losman from 2024, his debut novel, is a spectacular fiction about a literary translator in Copenhagen with Tourette who gets involved in an experimental study to find a cure. The HuffPost article is about his experience with TS. He's currently writing an essay involving older adults, the subject of this very personal proposal for AARP. His Substack is also called Bright Boy, A Tourette's Life, and more are at kesemmel.com.
Great. And I also wanted to say on behalf of the Tourette Association, we welcome you tonight. We are so honored that you are taking time to listen to Kyle's story and, reflect on your own. So my name is Dr. Katrina Hermstead. I'm the Vice President of Medical and Scientific Affairs at the Tourette Association. And the message really that I want to share with you tonight is that we see you, we hear you, and we want to be here for you at the Tourette Association. And so stories like Kyle's are uniquely his and yet not just his own. We have heard from this community for those that didn't have a soft landing like the Tourette Association as you were growing up with TS. And so I would also welcome and honor comments, feedback, ideas as we start to take this initiative even more seriously than we have in the past. So just one piece I wanted to share with you. I have been here at the Tourette Association for about 1.5 years in this role. And prior to that, I was a clinician at African Children's Hospital where I led the Tick and Tourette service. In my free time, I like to write. And so Kyle and I share that passion together. And so after reading his article and reflecting, I wanted to kind of open up with this little piece, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kyle so that he can also share his story. So after reading this beautiful piece and getting to know Kyle and getting to know your community here over the last 1.5 years, I've reflected on what it might be like for individuals that did not have a pediatric diagnosis and are coming to this condition, middle age, or maybe even never receiving it. So I wrote, imagine growing, aging, and dying, never having a word for your lived experience. This was the reality for generations of individuals living with, but not knowing that they had Tourette syndrome. In 2025, science is just now understanding the genetic markers of TS, that TS is a chronic condition, that TS is neurodevelopmental, and often occurs alongside co-occurring mental health conditions, that TS is lifelong, that TS isn't just tics, that people don't just get over it, that it isn't just a nervous habit, that it isn't rare, that it's not solely a disorder of childhood. Science knows this now, but what about then? The ones that have lived in the then. They are described by science often as the lost generation. In articles like Kyle Semmel's below, the lost generation becomes found. Pieces like this not only create space for those to knowingly share the same story, but also make space for those that the lost ones, those that have not found these written words, realizing through his words, this is my story, my childhood, my isolation, and my trauma. There is trauma in unknowing. In my own practice, it was not uncommon for me to give a twofer diagnosis after a TS evaluation appointment, one for the diagnosis of the child and one TS diagnosis for their parent. The parent, a lost one, told to stop doing that, told to get over it, still waiting to grow out of it, now watching their own child receive what they never did, a diagnosis, a community. In that sacred clinical space, 2 children began their journey with TS. The pediatric patient and that child that still lives within that parent, the lost. Grief sometimes lives in those spaces. There's grief in the unknown. So to this generation of the lost, those aging with TS, reconciling with trauma and grief, watching science come to understand what you always knew because you lived it, may you continue to be found and in turn become finders. The finders highlighted tonight use their voice as a beacon, looking for others walking alone, the lost. While each finder's story is their own, they share the same message. For those growing, aging, and dying with TS, welcome. You belong here. We know that you lived through the then. We welcome you to the now. Come sit by us. And there is healing in the no. And so with that, I turn it over to Kyle.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you, Maximus, for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to share my screen now, and looks good, Max?
We can still see the notes.
Still see the notes, okay. Better?
Perfect.
All right, great. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming out tonight. This is presented as an author evening, so I've decided to kind of focus this as part of about being an author, but also about being an author with Tourette's, and also being an advocate in using my writing skills to also help others with Tourette. Earlier this month, as Dr. Hermit mentioned, I published an article in the AARP's online magazine. That's the American Association of Retired Persons, for those who may not know. And I pitched the story knowing that there were many, many of us, many people who grew up, like Dr. Hermit had said, who grew up in an age when, before the diagnosis was more common, and, who had suffered with tics and various other, TS components, and went undiagnosed and therefore didn't get the kind of treatment or, community that many people today have. And so when I pitched the story, and I spoke with 4 women and men, 2 men and 2 women, via email, via phone, via Zoom, and basically interviewed them, their stories. And I'm going to share a little bit about each of these persons' stories here shortly. A little bit about me. I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome in 2017, and this after a lifetime of ticking. I started ticking early on, about 4th or 5th grade. My tics kind of looked like that in the beginning, and many of them they still kind of do. And I did a lot of eye blinking, a lot of snorting, a lot of chuffing air through my mouth. But I didn't get a diagnosis, and I wouldn't get a diagnosis for 30 years after, until that happened. So I wanted to share the stories that were similar to mine. This here photo is from the story, and this is one of my tics, is hand related. And so it was something that I kind of developed as a kid when, I'll come to this in a little bit later, but when I was first publicly kind of humiliated for having tics, I developed strategy for kind of subsuming them within other parts of my body that were less visible. So I could put my hand under the desk and I could release my urges to tic using my hands. And that's something I just kind of just became a tic that I've had throughout my life. And so the photographer here for AARP, she actually tried to capture this. And it looks like a really cool shadow photo, but I'm not sure it actually captures, and I'm not sure you can really capture a tic in a photograph anyway, but that was an effort. So here you see Vernell Jones. Now, Tourette syndrome affects individuals of all races and ethnicities. And when it comes to statistics, researchers point out that minorities have long been a blind spot. But that is thankfully beginning to change. And I wanted to highlight that in the AARP story. So Vernell was born and raised in Maryland. She was not diagnosed until she was in her 30s. She was a young mother at that time of 4 kids. When she was younger, she exhibited all the symptoms of Tourette's, and she herself believed that she had allergies. She didn't know any better. There was not a great amount of education about Tourette syndrome, so she thought she had allergies. Later on, when she started to question what these tics were for her, she was told by a doctor that she just had hiccups and they would go away. But it wasn't until she visited a Black woman doctor who really listened to her and knew what was actually happening, where these tics were Tourette's. They were part of something broader. And that was the first time that she actually felt seen and heard. And that's important. Stephen Barron here has been a successful businessman for decades. And like the other individuals I've interviewed for the story, he felt when he was young that something was wrong with him. He did a lot of tics as well. But he became adept at what we all know as masking. So like hiding the tics, finding ways around them, and just basically not revealing them. And one of the most poignant things he said to me in our interviews was that he, despite his success, he has taken many times in his life, he has not taken the risks that he should have or would have had he not been masking and having the tics as much as he did. But thankfully, and it's a large part, thanks to TAA and thanks to people on this call like you all, that is beginning to change, and we're beginning to see more acceptance of tics and Tourette. And this here is Jeffrey Kramer, and Jeffrey's an award-winning, Emmy award-winning producer and actor who was in films and roles like in MASH and Laverne and Shirley. But he was also, and you may know him best from his role in Jaws, the now classic film, 50 years old. And here he is in a scene from the film as Deputy Hendricks. So on sets, he would make noises like, he would say that they made noises like a ruptured duck. But he pretended, because he was an actor, he pretended that he was just warming up his voice. So he found ways around it too. And it wasn't until he was in his 40s that he was finally diagnosed when his own two sons were diagnosed with Tourette's. They had at sometimes severe Tourette's. And once they started going into seeing specialists and started to reveal what was happening to them, it was clear that it was the same thing that had happened to him his entire life. So that's where genetics, we can see a visible connection between Jeffrey and his sons. That's where genetics comes into play with Tourette's. And he's been a strong advocate ever since. And here's Jackie now. Back in high school, she was a class president and homecoming queen of a rural Iowa town. From the age of 6 years old, she would do some things with her hand. She would raise her right hand, and she would go up and down the stairs again and again if something didn't feel right. And many people outgrow their tics in puberty. And some people, and I would consider myself this, some people just kind of flatline and have the same sort of tics throughout their life. But then there are others whose tics get worse over time. And that has been, in Jackie's experience, her case. And nevertheless, she's an extremely upbeat woman. You may know her from other TAA panels as well. In fact, recently, Jackie and Vernell did an imposter syndrome for women workshop or panel through TAA, which I think was fabulous and I highly recommend. One of the things that it's really important to mention, and everyone on this call surely knows this, that it's equal. Men and women can get Tourette's just as equally as one or the others. It's not gender based in that sense. And it was really important for me to highlight in this article that the gender balance. So there's 2 men, 2 women. I wanted that to be very clear that this is not a male dominated condition. So this was a quick overview of some of the folks, actually all 4 of the folks that I interviewed for the AARP story. I know that I have a link that I can share, and I think that someone, whether it's Maximus or Portia, can share it after the event is over to everyone who's here tonight. I encourage you to read it and share it, and these are the kind of stories that I think we all need to tell people, especially me, who grew up at a time before it was widely known what our tics were. Before I get to my story, I want to say that the CDC estimates that between 350,000 and 450,000 US children and adults have Tourette syndrome. And according to the National Institutes of Health, up to 1% of the global population may also have Tourette syndrome, which seems very significant. I interviewed Dr. Hermitet for the AARP story as well. And one of the things that she said was really core to the story itself. And that is half of Americans with Tourette syndrome go undiagnosed. And a majority of those are older adults to older. So are adults to older adults. What she described before as the lost generation. So here's my story. I'm going to try to make this somewhat brief in the interest of time. Yes, I did publish the HuffPost story. I grew up in a small town in Western New York. When I was in 4th or 5th grade, I don't actually remember now, I started to do all these things with my head. I don't remember so much like when exactly it started. And I don't even remember specifically which tics they were. There were a lot of these, a lot of, like I said, we were chuffing and throat clearing. And when you're a kid, you don't know what these things are. What you do know is how people react to them. And when I was in a classroom, I had the teacher actually stop the class and basically tell me to stop. And it was at that moment that I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't stop. And so it felt deeply humiliating for me to have that experience. And again, this was a time when people didn't really know too much about Tourette syndrome. And as I write in the HuffPost piece, one of my earliest experiences with Tourette syndrome was actually watching, I think it was 60 Minutes, a program on coprolalia, when they highlighted a boy, I believe it was in Chicago, who was very public in his shouting and swearing. And when compared to that, and I was already ticking at the point where my mom and I watched this, but when we watched, I didn't connect myself to that boy because I didn't have any of those kinds of urges. What I did was just basic. But my tics would often mutate. So every 6 months or so, it seemed like clockwork, they would change overnight. So I might be doing this, and then I might go like this, or I do that with my neck, things like that. But I could track them almost. And I would lay in bed at night just thinking about them more than I should have been. But that's essentially my experience in childhood and discovering I have tics without really knowing what the tics were. Like I said earlier, I did develop ways because I did not like the experience of being humiliated. Sometimes my friends would do things, they would mimic my jerks or my blinks, but I was never bullied in the sense that many people with Tourette's are bullied. And I was lucky that way, but I still had this fear of being publicly humiliated. And so I would always do things, and I would be very, very small in my movements. I would learn how to basically transfer them from one body part to another, invisible, doing things like that. Basically, really starting that process of concealing the tics and keeping them away from others. One of my great passions, as you can see here, is baseball. Now I'm 10, I think, in this photograph. I have really bad form as a pitcher in this, but I was 10, I want to point out. But yet it was my kind of outlet was sports and baseball. I like to joke that I learned how to read by reading the sports pages. Every day my father would come home from work and he would have a newspaper, and I would read the sports page, and I would read every single box score of a baseball game. And then I would go out and I would reenact the game out in my lawn. And I obsessed, as I said, for years, and I would wear the same red sneakers for years, just because I'm a Cardinal fan and they were the red team. In high school, And really, for much of my life, until the last few years, I've really lacked confidence. I'll be honest to say this. I never thought I was worth very much, and I never considered myself to be smart. Um, I typically felt inferior to others. And the thing about this was you can project a successful outward experience while being inwardly a neurotic mess. And that was essentially me. And I don't know, it's hard to know how much is the Tourette syndrome, how much is something else. Um, like everything in life, psychology is complex. But I do say it to echo what Stephen Barron told me in an interview. I spent a lot of energy masking my tics for years. I too was unable and unwilling to take certain risks, and I spent a lot of time alone because of that. I just didn't want to be put in situations where I might have to reveal a part of myself that I didn't want to keep concealed, or that I might be revealed as being less than intelligent, which was this inordinate, strange fear that I had for much of my life. In college, however, those who know me will probably laugh at this slide if you're seeing this. It was in college that I discovered Bob Dylan's music. And this really brought art into my life. And I think it actually changed my life considerably. There have been very few days since college that I haven't listened to his music in some capacity. And I would sit there and I would religiously, read his lyrics or listen to his songs and just think about them. And that was part of my college experience. The other, of course, is writing and literature. This here, Flannery O'Connor, was one of my favorite. Her book, A Good Man's Hard to Find, a collection of stories, is one of my favorite collection of stories. A quietly subversive book. But others, James Baldwin, Philip Roth, Herman Melville, Joyce Carol Oates, John Gardner, these were all extremely important to my development, both in writing and just, I think, as a person as well. I think that's one of the beauties of literature. You can really get a sense of the world around you in ways that you can't if you don't read. And there's an old joke about college. There's a time and place for everything, and that place is college, and that time and place is college. And for me, that really couldn't be truer. I grew up quite a bit in college, and it took big strides towards becoming the person I wanted and imagined myself to be. I was a long way from it, but that was the kind of the first fire that was lit there. And so naturally, I came out of college looking like this, as one did back then. I was my Eddie Vedder days. After college, though, I kind of dipped backward and I disappeared inward. Here I am on a ferry heading somewhere in Ireland. This is the Irish Sea, pretending to be Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic. A funny little aside here is that my glasses flew off my face and nearly went into the Irish Sea. And I had to have one of the employees bring it to me. Anyway, I spent a lot of time in the next 4 or 5 years, basically by myself, mostly because I just felt like I didn't want to communicate with anyone. I did graduate school. I worked a lot so that I could afford these trips to Europe. But I really made no lasting friendships during that period. And it was a very agonizing and lonely period overall for me. One good thing about that, however, did come out when I went to graduate school in Kansas. I spent 3 years out in Kansas, and I didn't make any lasting friendships out there, but I did meet my future wife, who's pictured here, Pia, a Danish woman. And then after graduate school, we moved to Denmark and started life there for a while. And here's my son. We are standing in front of an Icelandic crater. And well, there's not much to say about that, I guess, here. And then I started translating. So the translation, as Max mentioned earlier, translated more than a dozen books. Here are some of them. In addition to those translations, this is like more than 2,000 pages right here. In addition to those, I also probably wrote thousands of pages of my own fiction. I didn't really believe in it, though. So I never, oftentimes I would write it and then never share it with anyone. because I simply didn't believe it was good enough. It was a part of my perfectionist streak that really was debilitating, I'd say. But having people in your life that you love really changes your perspective on things. And when my son was young, he started to do some of the kind of tics that I had been doing all of my life. And that got me to thinking very seriously about my own. Did he have tics because he was mirroring me, or were they, tics? Were they something more endemic to him? This photo was taken in 2015 at our home in Milwaukee. And like many fathers, of course, I have doted on him considerably. So his best interests were really important to me. We have a lot of similarities. We love baseball. And Katrina, you will like this. We're at Cleveland, and probably the very finest Major League Baseball park there is. We were watching the Cardinals, and unfortunately the Guardians won that day. But in 2016, I accepted a job as an executive director of a literary arts organization. And this was one of the most stressful jobs I've ever had in my life. And as with many people with Tourette's, probably everyone, when you're under a great deal of stress, your tics are really, really strong, and they come out and you can't really stop them. You can't control it. And so I was, my tics really ramped up during this period when I was a very public figure. In this photo, I'm introducing an author to an audience. In this photo, I'm on live television with literary agent Regina Brooks. And here I'm interviewing Michael Chabon, the Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist, in front of the largest audience I've ever been in front of, hundreds of people. And so there's always this sense when I was in that position that you're on display, but somehow you've got to keep your tics at bay. And that was really an impossible task. And eventually I burned myself out. And it kind of, in terms of my tics in this period, there was a moment in which I was so ticky. And when I'm really ticky and when I'm trying to hide it from others, I will go to my car and I will start driving. And that's when I start ticking, because no one's around and I can do whatever I want. But I had a scary moment when I essentially rear-ended a car because I was ticking so badly that I didn't stop in time. And it was at this moment that my years and years of ticking kind of came to the head. And I was like, you know what? I have a 7-year-old son. I want to make sure that I can see him grow up. I don't want to die in a car. So it was this time I finally decided that I really had to go and see what was going on with me. I had lived for a long time just simply accepting the fact that tics were a part of me without ever understanding what exactly they were, what part of me they were. So I started to ask important questions. What was going on with me and what were these tics? Luckily, living in Rochester, the University of Rochester has a very world-renowned movements clinic here. And I, in 2017, went to visit Dr. Morrison, who himself has Tourette syndrome, and he very quickly, diagnosed me. And that was a bit of a strange moment for me, because I had grown up always thinking that Tourette syndrome was essentially coprolalia. But the more he talked about it, the more I learned about it, the more I said, you know what, this is exactly what I've experienced all my life. This was a good thing in that it meant, for the first time, I didn't feel alone. And then I suddenly realized that there was a whole slew of people out there who also had Tourette syndrome, and I could meet them. I started a little session with guanfacine. I was on that for 3 weeks or so, and I didn't feel it ever worked for me. So I got off guanfacine, and I haven't taken anything since. I just basically lived with the tics such as they are. And yet for 7 years, I didn't do anything with this diagnosis, really. I didn't tell many people. And I didn't meet anyone with Tourette's. So I wasn't really involved in the TS community. After my experience as the executive director ended, um, I started to really think about what I was going to do next and what I wanted to do and who I was. Um, I've, as I mentioned, I translated multiple books and many things besides those, and I was pretty good at doing that. But I never, in spite of all my own fiction I'd written, I never really got any traction with it. And part of that is that I never really felt I believed in myself. And so one of the things that I made myself tell myself every day after that, it's like, you know what? Taking this Ani DeFranco quote, another Buffalo native and a wonderful musician, you've got your whole life to do something, and that's not very long. And I kind of use that as a model to think about, well, what can I do moving forward? And of course, fiction writing has been a part of my life for so long, and that's what I wanted to do. And I want to make sure that I was going to focus on my own writing and not necessarily on any more translations. Because when it comes down to it, if I didn't start believing in myself, no one else would. So 7 years would go by. I was writing essentially the Book of Lothman throughout much of that time. But then my wife, we started talking about things, and I mentioned that I wanted to tell my story. I wanted to meet other people. I didn't meet and I didn't know anyone else with Tourette's. And it had been 7 years since I was diagnosed, and it just felt like a long time to not actually know anyone. And so, I was also very afraid to go public. So I told her this, and she said, what you need to do is just reveal what you conceal. And this is not original to her, but it's something that the first time I'd heard it was from her. And it's a scary thought going public, at least for me. I didn't, growing up in the age I grew up, it just wasn't, talking about myself. Even this event tonight is a little bit unique to me because I'm talking more about myself than I ever do. But talking about my struggle with tics and self-doubt throughout my life, telling my story, but could that story help others? That's what I kept thinking about and wondering. And so finally, I decided that I would go ahead and I would write the story. And I ended up writing it for, as we talked about earlier, for HuffPost of all places. And now this is a bit of an algorithmic title. It's not my title, but it is that experience of sharing it in HuffPost was kind of monumental for me. And I didn't think it at the time. I took work off the day it was published, and I really just wanted to, I think, lie in bed all day because I was afraid of how people would respond to it. And amazingly, it got 700,000 reviews. It had 700,000 views and readers over the lifespan of a year and a half. And the interesting thing is that instead of feeling truly afraid now to talk about Tourette syndrome and my own experience with it, it's actually freed me to no longer conceal this. It's freed me to actually talk about it more. And that was something that I never would have guessed at the time. One of the reasons that I wanted to publish the story and to share my story is that I really, really wanted to meet other people with Tourette's, particularly older people. And the responses I got on that first day alone were incredible. I got emails from all over the world, from all walks of life, and from every age group. And some of the stories I heard were truly heartbreaking, of a gentleman who was in his 80s. I won't share the story because it's not my story to tell, but it was a heartbreaking story. And it just made me realize that this has been going on longer, much longer than even I am. So it was a beautiful thing that I was very afraid to do it, but yet it turned out okay. And since then, it has opened up. Like I mentioned, I've been talking more publicly about Tourette syndrome and trying to, share as much as I can about my experience and the experience of others that have Tourette syndrome. So here on our local NPR station, Dr. Morrison is the gentleman in the purple shirt there. I asked him to go on the program with me because, like with Dr. Hermitage, I always really go back to the scientists, the ones who actually know the science, they're the ones who can really talk about it best, I think. Yes, I can talk about my personal story, but there's background information and a way of talking about the science behind Tourette's that I'm just not as comfortable doing. So having him on was really a truly wonderful thing. And of course, earlier this year, I got to be the keynote speaker at the TAA TICCon. Even though I looked incredibly bald in this photo, it was an amazingly wonderful experience, and I was truly honored to do it. And as Maximus mentioned earlier, in 2024, I did finally publish a novel. After 30 years of trying and writing, I managed to publish a book. And it's called The Book of Losman. And I'm not sure what more I can say about it. It's about a literary translator with Tourette Syndrome who gets involved in the dubious drug trial in Copenhagen in a way to find a cure. So finding a cure and not ticking was something that I had always thought about. Like I just wanted. There were days I remember a time when I was lying in a empty room in Wiesbaden, Germany, ticking on the floor, just really wishing that I could just stop, that I didn't have to do this, that I could go out and have a beer with somebody at the bar and I wouldn't have to tick like this. And so I always thought about Tourette's as something that I had to get rid of. I don't necessarily think this way anymore because now, having talked to Dr. Hermitet and others, I've understood better this is a chronic condition and it's not going to go away. And that's okay. It's just part of me and that's totally fine. Now, the translation parts, the Danish parts, there are some similarities, obviously, between Losman and me. But this is fiction. This is not me. If you read the book, you'll discover as a speculative fiction, a lot of things happen in this book that definitely don't really happen in real life. So, but it was a wonderful experience, and it has allowed me to get kind of the word out even further. Here's a Buffalo News article about me. I'm not too keen on the expression late life since I'm only 50. Doesn't feel like late life yet. But it was good to get that out in the community and have that discussion also in Buffalo. And since then, I've been doing more on. I have a Substack called Bright Boy, which is for me it's an ironic title because I never felt bright. Part of the reason why I think I started to read really a lot was because I felt with reading I could actually learn and become a smarter person, and it was important for me. So I've interviewed so far just 3 people, all in the Tourette community: Greg Lawrence here, the Ryan Lawrence Foundation, Vernell Jones, of course, and Janelle Bean. And these are not, I'm not of the TikTok generation. I'm not a person who's going to go on and make TikToks. But the one thing I can do is just talk about my experience and my experience with others in these brief little videos and other types of stories. Which brings me back around to the AARP story. As someone who was diagnosed later in life, I'm really grateful to be part of this community. And I'm grateful to the Tourette Association of America for playing a leading role in advocating on behalf of Touretters everywhere. And as Dr. Hermitet mentioned, there's set to release a new brochure on dealing with Tourette as an adult, and I'm truly thrilled for that. This will help a lot of people, I think, who may never have truly felt heard. And I think moving forward, that's one of the unique things that I would like to be able to do too, is like share stories of people who may not have felt heard and really listen. So that's my presentation, and here's some ways you can reach me. I hope I haven't gone too long.
No, you've done great. Thank you so much, Kyle. That was an amazing program tonight. Before we jump into the questions, I just wanted to take a minute to share some slides really quick. One moment. Oops, sorry about this, 1 second. Can you see? Hold on 1 second. I'll just share my screen. Alrighty. Alrighty, so here's some upcoming events that we have. Our virtual things we have November 18th, the 2025 the competency bias, what it is and how to overcome it. On December 18th, we have Sip, Share, and Celebrate, which should be a fun holiday mix and mingle. And then, of course, our gala is coming up. On November 7th, there are still tickets available. If you'd like to join us, we would love to have you. And then we have our annual conference is coming to Nashville next year. We're looking right now for presenters. We also, if your feedback is really important to us and it helps us provide quality programming to members of the TS and TD community. So please take a few moments to fill out this brief survey, letting us know your thoughts on this program. I'm also going to go ahead and drop it in the chat after this. And then finally, supporting from our community continues to make these and other programs possible. If you enjoyed tonight's programming, please consider making a gift to the TAA so we can continue to provide quality programming for our constituents. We greatly appreciate you and we wish you all a great evening. Let's go ahead and get into our questions. Do we have some? Let's see. Okay, do you want to just go ahead and answer, Kyle? Our first question's coming from Sarah. How did you actually start unmasking enough to be comfortable not hiding your tics? Did it happen after you published this article?
That's a good question. I think no, it didn't happen after that. One of the things that I've been fairly ambitious in all my life. So in spite of all of my concerns about my intelligence and my abilities, I always felt I had to keep driving forward. And I would be in situations where I felt I couldn't tick. And I think what I invariably did would be to just kind of remove myself from the situation when it was really bad. So I guess I'm not sure if I'm answering this question properly, but I'm not sure even to this day whether or not if I'm really ticky, I wouldn't do it in public. So I'm not entirely sure that I still that I do unmask entirely. Even after the article, I think I'm more comfortable talking about it, but I think I still feel the residual effects of actually, a lifetime of hiding the tics or masking them basically means I think it's just ingrained in me, really. So I'm not sure I am unmasking as much.
All right. And then we also had a question. Did any of your motor tics in general appear to be self-harming, even if you had no direct intention of hurting yourself or endangering yourself?
Yeah, no, luckily I never had any self-harming tics. The worst that I could say for me is sometimes I would tic so often with my head that I would get headaches and neck aches, but that is so common, and it wasn't intentional harm. It just was a side effect of the tics.
Okay. Somebody else, my tics went haywire when the pandemic struck. Suddenly I was always on Zoom and I knew people could see my tics and I couldn't pretend I was under the radar. It actually helped me get more comfortable with my trip. Did you have that experience after the pandemic?
I didn't, because I didn't have to be around anyone. It was great. I'm gonna make a joke of that. Luckily for me, I didn't have that same situation. And one of the things that with Zoom is you could always stop your sharing. So if you needed a tick, you could always just stop. And I took advantage of that for sure, but like not being around people in the office, not going into office. I remember specifically one time when I heard somebody in my offices before the pandemic hit. I heard one of my colleagues say I was making noises. And I heard her say it under her breath, but she didn't know that I had Tourette's, and that was kind of an embarrassing moment for me. And so I kind of, after that, I would close my door. So that doesn't directly answer the question. Basically, I didn't have that problem during
All right.
uh,
Awesome.
COVID.
We have another question. What was your diagnosis process like, and how long did it take? And did you have trouble finding all your doctors?
I didn't have trouble finding a doctor, largely because it was, like I said, uh, the University of Rochester has this medical center that's very strong in this area. And the process was actually surprisingly uh, strange and easy, and one that I didn't quite know what to make of, to be honest, because it was mostly a question and answer kind of format. At least my experience with it was, and I didn't know what to make of that. I'll be honest, that experience, and yet it felt like the right thing, and it felt like the best thing. There's no blood test or anything like that. Maybe Dr. Hermitek can speak to this more because she's actually someone who has provided diagnoses over the time. So maybe Dr. Hermitage should answer this question.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, tic disorders are relatively easy diagnosis when you think about it medically, right? Because it pretty much is, if you have vocal tics, yes, the motor tics, yes, were they prevalent before age 18, and if you had them longer than a year, right? And so you don't have to have a scan, right? You don't have to have a comprehensive, significant diagnostic appointment. And so what we are starting to do at the TAA is we're strategizing and working very closely actually with primary care and our pediatricians, because often for individuals' diagnostic journey, it starts with that primary care provider. And if that primary care provider doesn't know about TS, doesn't know what they're looking at, doesn't know that what they're seeing are tics, that sends people for a very long medical journey that oftentimes results in medical trauma, distrust in medicine, and never receiving that accurate diagnosis. Interestingly, the other groups that we're working with are specialty care, because in pocket have some horror stories, but individuals that maybe had an acute tic attack and ended up in the emergency room and that ED team didn't know what they were looking at, or, individuals that maybe had a chronic sniff or cough habit and sat in allergy and pulmonology, never getting that diagnosis. And so, we are really thinking strategically about getting in front of those medical communities, because there's still a lot of work to do with our neurologists and our psychologists and our psychiatry partners, but there's even more work to do with our specialty care providers. So that's how we're kind of starting to answer that question. Yep.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more. We have, what is your thought on CBIT?
So I've tried CBIT, and I don't think it was for me. I think partly because it was so expensive with my insurance, and three sessions in, and it was very expensive. But I think it works for some people, but it didn't work for me ultimately. But part of that might be because I simply wasn't in it long enough to try it long enough.
Okay.
There's someone who wants to ask a question but doesn't know how. So
Theta, I can give her permission to speak really quickly.
Yeah, and we have a couple minutes too, because there's some really great questions kind of coming in here. Just one comment on the CBIT piece, right? So I think it's very important that for those that are considering CBIT, that we, while we consider it a treatment line one of the best practices for tics, it is about living with a chronic condition, right? CBIT is not meant to be curative, and while a lot of people have success kind of getting those tics, in the passenger seat in their life in the driver's seat, it's very important that we really go in with that mentality, right? Because if we feel that CBIT is going to cure us, or we're going to walk out without tics, we're kind of setting ourselves up, because kind of like, Kyle's story, sometimes tics come and they go. And so, it's really about, identifying what those kind of setting events are that make tics difficult, and learning how to live and advocate for a chronic health condition.
Oh, and then we got a friend. What is CBIT? So, let me see. Let me give Seda. I'm giving you you can ask your question here, Seda.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I want to know what type of did you ever get a chance to do programs for people with Tourette syndrome? And if you did, what were they? And my other question is, what was the most helpful treatment and medication that you use for your Tourette's? Because I use prescription Risperdal for it, and my medical team is trying to find me a better prescription to use to treat me for my Tourette's. And I also wanted to know, how did you treat your corporalalia, because that is a kink of mine that I deal with a whole lot, and I don't know where to go for help for it, or who to really ask for support in that area. And my last question is, did you ever get a chance to do college education or university with Tourette syndrome? And if you did, how did you get the best supported for it? And did you get any type of therapy for, like occupational therapy for your Tourette syndrome?
Oh, that was a loaded one. Let's see what we can get out of Kyle.
I don't know if I can remember everything. I will just start off by saying I've not done another event with anyone with Tourette syndrome before, other than a panel at TICCON. I don't have coprolalia, so I don't. That's not an issue for me. For one, I don't take any treatment options, and I think part of that is, like, for me, I feel as though my tics are manageable. I can't speak for others. I can only speak for myself. And I live with my tics as they are, because it's not, there are periods when I have more tics than others. But overall, it's manageable. So if you're having other issues, then definitely seek a provider in your community, somewhere nearby that you can reach out to. And maybe Dr. Hermitek can also address that question, because that's more of a clinical question, I think.
Okay, there we go. I'm looking like a robot. I don't know what's going on with my signal here. So yes, I love that. And my California team here let me know that you have some good connections here in Cali. So what I would say is make sure that you're connecting to Portia and Max after the call, so we can make sure that we can provide that support that you're looking for. That's kind of related to Daniel's question too, about navigating relationships, making social connection. And so I want to talk about kind of a couple late breaking news that we have about medication.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I live in California, and I got a wonderful neurologist that I work with, and I'm trying to get started with like the CBIT therapy at the moment, and
Yep.
try to get that started up again. And I also mentor people with Tourette syndrome too. I love helping people and advocate about Tourette syndrome.
I love that. So you're making that community, right? Like, you're making that kind of soft space for others, right? So that sounds like you're doing a lot of great work. So I would say reach out to Portia. If you guys have ideas for programs, throw it in that email right there. So a couple treatment things I want to let you know about. So as many of you know and have been following, ecopipam and created by MLX, we are watching very carefully for kind of the final news we have about that medication. And so we will actually be having, I think in May, a science showcase where we're going to be having programming on DBS. We're going to be having programming on new medication and new behavioral intervention and therapy. So we will make sure that that program month gets to you guys. So yes, we were watching that carefully. Like many of you said, those that are on medication for tics, a lot of times you're getting those comorbidities in control. So you might be on, SSRIs or stimulant medication, right? You might be using things like blood pressure medication off label, right? Because there really is no medication for tics yet. Therapeutically, like was said in the chat, there's CBIT and then there's CBT. Those are often confused with each other. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. It's the theory that when you are feeling things, a lot of the times your thoughts, emotions, feelings, they're all in a ball. And what CBIT does is it makes it that beautiful triangle of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So it separates that out. I would say on the behavioral science way, probably the coolest stuff that I'm seeing is the incorporation of ACT, which is acceptance and commitment therapy, and using ACT strategies embedded within CBIT. So for any of you that have done ACT, ACT is about seeing yourself as you are now, right? Not really like working on that change mechanism. You're accepting who you are and what you are, and really committing to therapy and committing to change from that space. So really great work. And a lot of that great work is actually coming out with adults. And so I can send you the science too on that if you guys like to read about kind of the new frontier. So happy to help.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hermitet, for that insightful medical navigation for all of us. As always, if you ever need anything at all, please do reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. Our team is here for you. We believe in you. We support you. So, do you
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
If Christina Rosan is still on the call, and I see she's in Canada, definitely if she reach out to the Ryan Lawrence Foundation, and that's Greg Lawrence, who's just outside of Toronto, and they're doing some wonderful work in that TS community up there, and definitely somebody that if you don't already know them, you should meet.
All right. Great. Well, thank you all for tuning in, and thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Hermitet. Everybody take care.
Thank you all for joining and listening. Take care.
Thank you.